And we are live. Welcome to week 2 of the Smart Kitchen Summit. And what better way to kick it off in a deep dive into the future of restaurants? And this is a really great panel. And I'm excited to have Perrin Davidson, who is the founder of a publication that I've been following for a while, LA Eats, moderate this conversation. Perrin, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce everyone and take it from there.
Yeah, really excited today to talk about the future of restaurants, and we have an amazing panel, and hopefully we're going to be able to get through some great questions and really try to frame everything in the view of how do independent operators kind of look at technology and also how do some of the larger players and what's similar and what's different. So I'm going to have everyone introduce themselves real quick. We have an amazing panel with Ben Leventhal and Elizabeth Tilton and Tom Cortese. And Ben, if you want to start introducing yourself, and then we'll jump to Elizabeth and then to Tom, and then we'll get right into the questions.
Sure thing. So, hello everyone. Happy to be here. Excited to chat. I'm Ben Leventhal. I'm the founder of Eater and the founder of Resi, and most recently and currently the founder of a company called Blackbird, which is focusing on loyalty and payments for the restaurant industry, specifically independent restaurants who we think have the most to gain from a new construct around payments and loyalty.
That's great. Elizabeth?
Great. Hi, everyone. I am Elizabeth Tilton calling in from New Orleans. I am the founder and CEO of Oyster Sunday and OS BENEFiTS. Oyster Sunday is a consulting company that helps to bring to life and help operate hospitality businesses coast to coast and now internationally as well. And OS BENEFiTS is the first health insurance and wellness benefits made for and by the hospitality industry. It's a tech product that helps to administer health insurance to any operator in America coast to coast as well. Glad to be here.
Great. Thanks. Tom?
Hey, my name is Tom Cortese. I am the co-founder of a company called Peloton, which is not at all a restaurant or affiliated with restaurants, now creating counter service here in New York City with Steve Ells, the former founder of Chipotle, where we are working on a fast casual sandwich shop that is tech-enabled to put culinary talent at the center, bring fresh food into fast food, and go and tackle the sandwich market.
Awesome. Well, we have a great panel and we're going to jump right in. I wanted to get everyone's thoughts on what key technology you feel may or may not have helped restaurants in the last 5 years. And it very well could be there's nothing. So open-ended, love to start with Ben and we'll just jump around.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It's possible that the answer is nothing has helped very much at all in the last 5 years, although it's undeniable that the shift in terms of consumer behavior, in terms of dining behavior towards less in restaurant and more around things like delivery and other at-home branded and licensed services has definitely shifted the revenue mix. So to the extent that companies like DoorDash and Uber Eats have aggregated tons of demand for restaurants and funneled that demand to restaurants, I think in that way, probably, that's what's been productive. I think the concentration of consumers around these humongous platforms has created some challenges and will continue to be challenging for restaurants as they try to assert themselves and have leverage. But to the extent that something has changed, to me, it certainly is around where restaurants and consumers connect and new ways that restaurants have to plug into different kinds of consumer audiences.
Great. Elizabeth, what do you think? I know you have a little more of a back-end perspective too in terms of how restaurants operate.
Yeah, definitely. I think I will echo Ben. I think as people have expanded their revenue streams, having those technologies interacting and being more interdisciplinary, I think is key. So managing your data in-house, understanding it better, and not trying to be as proactive, not as reactive, which I know we'll talk about AI and the impact of that. And that's actually furthering that. But I would say in the last 5 years, one thing that's become abundantly true is as these alternative revenue streams have come to market or people are understanding how to bring them into their business, controlling that data, gaining loyalty, understanding your customer base and your CRM has been vital, particularly as we had to learn who we're talking to in the middle of COVID. And then that catalyzed, I think, our understanding of our own data mix. So I think that's one thing that as operators are doing is they're doing more email marketing and really leveraging that data about their customers and owning them more directly versus relying on third party.
I think you said it really well, owning the relationship directly. And obviously, Tom, you have a great understanding of the customer and dealing with them directly too. So like from that perspective, how has that affected what technology do you think help you actually connect with the customers and maybe you have used or would like to use going forward?
Yeah, I mean, it seems really clear that in the past 5 years, the biggest shift in in restaurant technology landscape has been the shift towards marketplace. I mean, the advent of the marketplace has completely changed how we interact with restaurants, and then how restaurants need to behave, right? So it's really supercharged this notion that to be a great restaurant, you have to be digitally native. You have to be able to plug into these different platforms, and then at the same time, you have consumers starting to change behavior, where while we still all enjoy being with one another as people, and we enjoy hospitality, we still want the convenience of a digital order, or a simple, quick digital loyalty platform to be able to interact with our brands on TikTok or Instagram. All this has become increasingly important to us as consumers, and restaurants now have to play in that space, and they have to be able to have systems that connect to that. So you've got to move off of the paper and into a digital system, and you need a really simple digital system that can help you do that.
And Ben and Elizabeth both talked about, obviously, the marketplaces and a lot more moving to off-premise. With your great concept in terms of where it started with Kernel and how it's progressed, how much did the off-premise piece affect how you guys pivoted? And was that a role in deciding that sandwiches might be a little bit easier to get to the customer based on the new type of demand?
Yeah, I think if we were going to try and figure out the easiest food to deliver to people, I think we'd conclude what it seems like most have, which is the easiest thing to do is just put a bunch of stuff into a bowl and hand it to people. But that's just getting boring and not the most appetizing, right? So we actually wanted to pick a harder problem and a potentially bigger market. So can you, if I'm going to serve someone a roast beef sandwich, can I actually roast the beef and then cut it and then make the horseradish sauce? And generally the answer is no, that's not possible in quick serve, because you want to figure out how to freeze everything or preserve everything. But if we can develop technology that does a better job with predictive analytics, I could do a better job running a just-in-time supply chain, and all of a sudden I think we can cook fresh food and deliver it to the customer in a fast way. And then if the main problems that restaurants have in terms of operating and running their own business come down to labor and food waste, then again, how can I employ technology to help my restaurant team folks who are on the line reduce their cognitive load so that their jobs feel a little bit easier, so that what they need to do next comes more naturally because the technology is there to help them along, which makes it so that they want to stay in that job a little longer, and you can reduce these turnover rates from 150% to something at least a little bit better on an annualized basis. And then, again, using predictive analytics to help manage inventory so that you can keep food waste in line. I think all of a sudden you can operate a better restaurant with better, fresher food.
Love it. And I think that's what everyone wants, want a better quality food at the same or a better price. So I think leading to that, I would love to get each of your thoughts on where you think technology is actually going to create the most impact over the next 5 years, whether it's front of the house, back of the house, labor. Obviously Ben has a really great understanding of loyalty and what it means to bring the customer back in. Where do you each think that there actually can be an advance? And also, as an independent operator who maybe hasn't had the opportunity, what's the easiest technology for them to take over the next 5 years versus someone who might have, a technology officer or a whole tech team, even if that's two people, versus the person wearing many hats? So just if you think about it from both views and give us your thoughts, would be great. Love to get Ben's thoughts first, and we'll just go around again.
Yeah, so obviously I think loyalty is the frontier, but I think there's something that we should sort of put in the conversation up top, which is that it's incredibly hard for independent restaurants to make use of any of this technology that's not on board with a big system like POS or delivery or reservation. So I think we have to understand, in a very fundamental and in my opinion, problematic way, we are limited by the innovation of the big players. So POS has to be innovative for the independent restaurant industry to be innovative. It's not really going to work otherwise. The things that Tom are talking about are incredible, and it's one of the reasons that Kernel is exciting. And in full disclosure, I'm an investor in Kernel, but you have to have Kernel scale to be talking about those things. Independent restaurants are at the mercy of whatever Toast is doing and whatever Resi is doing. And by and large, if you think about how little progress has been made in the four walls of a restaurant in the last 5 years or 15 or 20 or however long you want to go, POS is a huge culprit. POS is, in my opinion, the great barrier to progress and to change in the restaurant industry. And my great hope for the restaurant industry is as we move forward, we hold POS accountable for being the gatekeeper that it is. So first of all, I think that's the first important thing, in my opinion, to start with. Is this is a hopes and dreams conversation until we can get the big systems to be a little bit more open to innovation and change. That being said, I think that there's a lot of opportunity. Obviously, we think that opportunity is in loyalty and how the payments rails are going to evolve. But I think that for the average independent restaurant, my view or my recommendation would be, pick one thing where you think that there can be something interesting for you. Pick one new system, pick one thing that's sort of outside of the universe of your standard operating procedure, and lean into it. And that could be AI in the kitchen. That could be a MPS feedback tool. That could be something that's engaging for your servers and for your employees. There's tons and tons of innovation happening. I think that the average independent restaurant is much more likely to sort of suffer from indigestion than starvation when it comes to this stuff. And so the way to sort of mitigate that is just to be focused and to say, okay, this is the one thing this year that I'm going to focus on. I'm going to focus on getting my employees happier. The one thing I'm going to focus on this year is doing a little bit better from a food costing and inventory management standpoint. You can get any one of these things done. The problem is when we sort of throw it all into this sort of future of everything bucket and all technology is amazing bucket, that we start to think that then, we start to have a problem even understanding where to start. So I think it's sort of pick a lane and stick with it.
Almost like triage for what you think your individual organization needs first, and then let the technology drive what you actually need help with versus chasing something that you think might help you. And 6 months later, you realize it was a waste of time.
And make your discontent with toast known.
Elizabeth, tell us too what you think. Obviously, you have a perspective with the labor side, which everyone knows is a huge problem. And Tom obviously shared that it's about 150% turnover per year. I mean, it's a challenge for everyone. And we'll get into the automation piece, but there's never a time where we're not going to need labor. So how do we maybe support them with technology?
Yeah, I mean, when I come at the perspective, we only at Oyster Sunday, we really service independent operators. And to us, that can be hospitality in its greatest sense. And we'll focus on restaurants here. But one thing that we're really adamant about is being interdisciplinary. So we do finance, operations, HR, marketing, branding that can't sit in silos. And I think that kind of going off of what Ben was saying is that the POS is the heartbeat of the technology ecosystem of a restaurant. It's the first decision you should make. And then everything else is in service of trying to figure out with your revenue streams and what systems you need to make your business viable and to what degree is viable for you, right? So you don't have to have every tech stack. Your tech stack could be three things. Most important stuff is like point of sale, reservations, and some sort of inventory, data management, and labor. And, but I think what's really important is that the ecosystem leading up to where we are right now in 25 is that this tech stack, if you look at the ecosystem of technology in restaurants, it's a cluster. There's so many people trying to get into the tech stack. There's so many people trying to wedge their way in all of these systems in your business. And what I think is going to happen is that there's going to be a gobbling up that we see from point of sale being the first party to really gobble up, bring in house, and then distribute. But I think what's most important is that whatever technology the operators are using now in independent restaurants needs to allow us to be proactive rather than reactive. Everything we do is always looking backwards. And I think that what we need to be doing is looking forward and saying, we know every year summer in New Orleans is brutal. Then how is that impacting every decision your business should be making going into cash reserves, labor modeling, all of these decisions, menu mix, all of this should be in pursuit of that versus us getting back into July and saying, oh, I wish we had done. And I think that to us as an industry should be something we're looking at. And real quick, Perrin, to go on your comment about labor, is that we do a lot of labor modeling, even the financial implications, but OS benefits is meant to be, it's a ACA compliant health insurance and fringe benefits that are made for the industry. It's a tech product. We're selling health insurance to buy into any 50 states. And I think what's important there is saying not only is the efficiency of your business, the technology of your business important, but as is taking care of humans and taking care of the whole human in pursuit of being able to be most efficient and knowing that to Tom's point, the turnover is an unbelievable expense to your business. It's like $6,000 to $8,000 to onboard, to recruit, onboard, and to retain talent. And if you make a contribution to health insurance that we know proves to be an investment back into people, it can be an enormous impact on your P&L. So I think that the most important thing is that we can't go back and say, please don't leave. We sit there and say, I'm making an investment into you. And I think that we need to take the same approach on technology.
Yeah, I mean, I relate so much to what Elizabeth and Ben are saying. I'm 1 year and 1 month into my education in the restaurant space. And I have observed that there are essentially 3 categories of technology that are available to the restaurants. And one is, these huge enterprise SaaS players that if you pick up the phone and you call them, which by the way, I've called them all, and you're like, hi, I have 1 restaurant, they hang up. And if you get them to hang on the phone for just a little bit longer, they'll tell you, yeah, I'll talk to you after you have between 50 and 150 restaurants. And you're like, okay, cool, not helpful, thank you. So you've got those guys, and big behemoths, and they have those terrible enterprise sales cycles, and they're never going to innovate, and God help them, and all of us. Then on the other side, you have this garbage dump of technology players. I mean, it is the most wild scattershot of tiny little pieces of software I've ever seen in my life. And they all magically charge the same price from what I could tell. Everybody charges you $300 per location for their thing. And you've got to string together all the things in order to make what would be in any other industry just sort of a normal, rational, small tool. And this was described to me in an interesting way. Like, how did this come to be is what I keep asking. And one of the reasons is because there's no money in restaurants. And so I think that's been difficult. That's a whole nother problem. But the other side is just what seems to have happened is, as the restaurants moved from paper to digital, and that happened really fast and then got accelerated through COVID, all of a sudden people were suffering small little wounds. I'm a restaurant and I have a new wound, and now I want to go out and buy a new Band-Aid for that wound. And so it's like, oh shit, I've got a problem. I need it solved now. This is what the problem is. And you go and you get this tiny little piece of software and you cover up that wound. And then tomorrow you have a new wound, and you get a new Band-Aid and you cover that. And all of a sudden you've got all these systems that don't really talk to each other. And then something's not working for your customer. And all you want to do is help your customer, right? Because at the end of the day, it's a hospitality business. And then you say like, oh, I know why it's not working. It's not working because my kiosk is down. So you call the kiosk provider and you're like, guys, you're down. And they're like, oh, no, we're not down. It's the person who talks to the person who talks to the person who talks to our kiosk that's down. And you're using this one to talk to this one to talk to that one. And you're like, ah. And I cannot imagine how a restaurant works this way. I would go absolutely nuts. Actually, I've been going nuts with all it. I hate it all. I hate it all. It's a terrible state. Okay, so so you've got the big enterprise behemoth, dinosaur, not going anywhere, and you can't even talk to them. Then you've got the scattershot, garbage dump, whatever you want to call it. Then you've got basically toast. You've got the one cohesive all-in-one. But those guys are now 15 plus years old, also built on a less modern stack, also built before the quick escalation to digital. And so it does really feel like there is a need to there's a need for something new. If you talk about the future, it's hard not to talk about AI, right? If you're building a piece of software today, you're going to leverage that piece of technology because it's the most modern. And then if you're a restaurant operator today and you're looking at running your restaurant, you want to have a great front of house experience and great hospitality. So what Ben is doing and loyalty makes a ton of sense. You want to have great direct loyal customers, and then you want to have really smooth, efficient operations, right? You need to be able to, you need to be able to have high quality food that's consistent and delivered to the customer exactly the way they want it and when they want it. So you need a simple tool to help you manage those operations hyper efficiently. And I do think that AI is going to play a really convenient role on both of those components.
That was
And
great.
Tom, just one thing to add to that, I think your point about data sets being disparate, I think that's a huge issue that we play with now, is that we have all this customer information, we have sales information, we have labor information, but none of them overlap that well. So it's now good data in, good data out, bad data in, bad data out, right? It's number one. And I think that that's really important. But to more importantly about the tech stack right now, and I think something I want to reiterate is that like most of those probably started for independent operators, and now they're enterprise. And I think that that's important too, because it's like then the next wave will come in, and I think we're in this a really important moment, I think, for independent operators to decide what systems work best for them. And it's not just passing down saying, well, this P&L works for this operator, so it should work for your business. It's got to kind of really evaluating what the ecosystem is and where it's going to like not just default.
Yeah. And I think you guys hit it on the head. Just to give the audience more context, about 70% of the industry is independent operators and have a single unit. So most people are just one unit, and you think they're running 10 spots, but they're running one, and it's almost the same amount of work. So to go to a question that we have not directly, which someone was talking about pop-ups, are they the future? And with that, the friction to start a restaurant has probably never been lower, especially with the digital presence and the idea of creating, pickups and the idea of drops and all these things. And I want to start with Ben, but how did loyalty play a role, since your perspective is thinking about all the time, in the sense of how much more important, I guess, from my view, is it to keep a customer than it is to just acquire a new one? And obviously, I think you have a great perspective and love to just go around and see what loyalty means and retaining that kind of loyal customer, the person that you need to come back over and over.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think for us, we see it as by being about a restaurant being in control of their own destiny. I mean, look at the App Store right now. The top 200 apps are all huge restaurant companies. Arby's, Texas Roadhouse, Tropical Smoothie Cafe, IHOP. That's just 45, 46, 47, 48. Companies of size, they're launching their own apps. They're creating their own technology ecosystems because they want to own their customers. And they want to own their customers so that they don't have to buy them back over and over again from DoorDash and from Resy and from OpenTable and from Toast. That's the name of the game here. If independent restaurants are to have any future at all, we're going to have to figure out how independent restaurants can have much more control of their audience and their customer base. And that is definitionally loyalty. So we have to build tools so that independent restaurants can understand who their customers are individually, not your customers tend to be from these four zip codes. These are your customers. These are the actual humans that come into your restaurant, and here's how to here's how to connect with them, and here's how to make sure that they come back. It's the oldest idea that independent restaurants have always thrived on regulars. It just turns out that this idea of a regular, it gets more and more hard to figure out, because you have all these other companies with their hands in the till with their technology products trying to steal your customers. So it used to be a handful of folks that were aggregating demand. And now, if you think about it, the entire funnel of discovery of restaurants, you have larger companies stealing your customers. At every stage of the decision making, in terms of me finding my way to my local restaurant, there's a large company that's trying to siphon off that audience. So unless we can come up with some tools that rebalance that equation, that give some of that control back to independent restaurants, I think we have a really substantial problem, an existential problem for independent restaurants, because they can't afford to keep buying their customers back. So loyalty is connectivity. Loyalty is understanding who your audience is and being in control of it.
Yeah, and I think to kind of expand on that for loyalty is I think it's about, when you go into hospitality, to be seen, right? Like you're as soon as you walk in the door, maitre d' used to do that in the old school, right? See your name, say welcome, here's your table. And I think that the digital world allows us to make that easier, theoretically, as long as you're keeping up with it and ensuring that notes are in there and able to follow loyalty. But I think what it comes down to, and you're seeing this, I love looking at different industries for inspiration of how we should move forward. And you can't help but turn to things like fashion and even just health, and everything's about personalization. Monogramming everything, personalized medicine, personalized. And I think that loyalty is a part of that. If you walk into an operator, if a guest walks into your location more than one time, they expect that you knew that. And it's not nice to have. And I think if they're particularly if they're going from one restaurant and they're going to your second location, they also expect that you know that. Because I think that that's just part of what loyalty is becoming. And I think that is inherently part of personalization. You understand they like their martini 50-50 with dry, 50-50 with an olive and a twist. And that should be, you should know that at every location. So I think that to me is just crucial.
Tom, what do you think too? Obviously, you have a perspective kind of, especially with the pivot and everything. So it's understanding kind of your point of view would be great in terms of how you guys have incorporated some of that maybe going forward and in terms of how you're operating counter service.
Yeah. Yeah. First on the personalization piece, I'm one of very mixed minds there. I am the guy who offered the Peloton bike in black and your personal choice of also black or black. And there's a lot of value in having having a clear opinion. And I think in a space like food where we have chefs at the center, and the chefs have got all this wonderful culinary education, and they're putting forward and they're saying, like, here, I've made you this wonderful creation and here's how it ought to be. I think there is something just and call me romantic, but I think there is something beautiful about allowing that to be. And again, to me, that is very much the antithesis of this emerging slop in a bowl culture, where it's like I'm solving so much for personalization that I'm going to let people make bad choices. Like, here, sure, put all these weird unrelated things in a bowl. Might be terrible, but you asked me for it. So that's me giving a dramatic one-sided view there. Obviously, there's room to personalize an experience to make sure that when you walk into my restaurant, I have the tools to be able to say hello and greet you and remember that you were there. We're looking at figuring out how our kitchen display system that we're building ourselves can, inform the restaurant operators and say, hey, this order that you're about to serve to Elizabeth, just so you know, Elizabeth ordered last week, and here's what she ordered last week. And so if you want, you can, as the restaurant operator behind the desk, if you want, you can use that piece of information to say, hey, Elizabeth, good to see you again today. How was that chicken club last week? And that's personalization. I think in a more elegant way, and one that puts hospitality first. Again, not to draw too many parallels to Peloton, but we did this really early on at Peloton. One of the first pieces of technology that we created was our instructor app that no one saw, but it was on the bike in front of the instructor, on the treadmill in front of the instructor, and we would tell the instructor things about the people in their audience, and then those instructors would make those call outs to the folks in the audience, and it created this wonderful emotional loyalty that paid dividends long into the future for both the customer and the brand. So we're interested in continuing to explore, how those pieces tie into how we utilize technology to bring hospitality and culinary talent forward.
I think to clarify the personalization point, I think it's more on the operation side. I would say that if you're, the three things that an operator owns and a restaurant owns is product, operations, and design. And those are things you covet. And I think the personalization is more about feeling seen. So it's more on the loyalty side, not necessarily you can have a club with an insert odd ingredient on it. I would say you hold that dear, and then everything else, like it's like the limiting reagent becomes more confinement, right? I think that's important.
Yeah, I think you guys hit on it: personalization versus customization, maybe. So like the bowl is customized and maybe leaves for some opportunity to ruin it for yourself, but personalization just reminds you of the pieces you like and hopefully connects you back to the operator. And there are a lot of operators. I just met with one of the original chef from Father's Office, and their whole thing was no substitutions. And it's not just because an ego, it has to do with the quality of the food. Sometimes it has to do with the kitchen size. There's a lot of other factors. So you can maybe still have something that's completely uncustomizable while being very personalized. Maybe they pair with the right beer for you or something like that. So the bringing the data together doesn't mean chef has to compromise. So I think that's really interesting. And hopefully we can kind of continue on with this piece in terms of how automation might play a role, both obviously in supporting the bowl type culture, but also how does it support a more traditional, a back of the house operation. So would love to kind of see how you guys see automation playing a role, whether it's from the front of the house or in the kitchen, or even if it's like a cocoa robot, which I know is another panel, but something like that in terms of delivery. How do you each see automation kind of evolving over the next 5 years? And I'm sure everyone knows robots are constantly in all of our thoughts right now. So Ben, what do you think first in terms of some of the pieces around automation?
I think that this one's above my pay grade. I think Tom's the right person to answer this question. But in terms of, a close cousin of automation, at least in terms of how we think about it, is sort of taking things that are data and turning them into productized things for restaurants. Like let's be clear, like the average independent restaurant is not going to be automating that much. Okay, let's just let's have a real conversation here. We're not talking about a world where in the next 5 years there's a whole lot of robots walking around independent restaurants. Like maybe we're going to see in some context QSR, casual restaurants, more screens. That's an example of a sort of kind of automation, I guess. But I think what we have to be doing is thinking about the data streams that are coming in, the customer information, everything from weather to Liz's point about understanding seasonality, about the cyclical nature of revenue, and giving restaurants 1-button, 2-button technology solutions to change things. If we see in the data that it's Tuesday night and it's raining and it's August and we're in New York City, that delivering that data to the restaurant is not sufficient, because so what? They don't have the tools to go and place a bunch of ads to get more customers in. They're short staff, so they're probably not going to be able to send some kind of real-time message to get more customers in. We need to take that extra step for them. We need to automate the data in ways that, again, give restaurants control of their own destiny. So if it's Tuesday night and we know it's going to be a soft night, the button should just say, you're going to need more customers. Do you want to proceed? It's going to cost you $450 to fill the restaurant tonight. Yes or no? That to me is the kind of automation that we should start to see happening for independent restaurants. I think that those kinds of things are absolutely within reach, and certainly you'll see those things. You'll see Blackbird start to play around with those things. But to me, that's sort of for independents. That's what automation is about.
Making it easy.
Make it easy.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's always going back to when you think about. Just take a step back. When I was studying, I was doing chemistry, and there's always certain limiting reagents that I bring up, that everything else is controlled, and there's certain things that are able to be variable. And I think the variability is around hospitality and food. And I think the controls are things like training, marketing, communications, finance, understanding data, right? Or analyzing the business health. And so I think those are where things can be controlled and be automated. And I think there's a lot of really clear ways we can do that. For example, you can create even simple things that I think about independent operators, like what is a free option that you have is you create a ChatGPT agent and you put your brand voice in there and you tell it to run 16 things about happy hour for the foreseeable future, and you never write another post about it. And it's just simple things like that can sit there and take out variability, put it in, automate it, schedule it, and don't come back to it for another quarter. And I think that is when you do that, you free time, you free energy, time, and then that all gets spent to creative, hospitality. You can keep lean on labor. Another good example is for like with your finances, if you have 2 P&Ls, you put them in month over month and you say, where is the variability of line item to cost? And then that's other ways that a small operator can do that. I highly recommend taking your name off of those P&Ls. Make sure anything that's like indicated to you. I know it's a huge model, but there's no reason to be giving away everything. But I think those are really clear ways where you can sit there and say, why was my energy bill up $1,000? And then you can go in and that's time well spent and worth it. So I would just say those are, to Ben's point, it's much more of utilizing it to be helpful towards your business, but it's not going to solve everything. And it's not going to catapult this leaps and bounds. It's just saying, where are those variables that you can streamline and then take that either off someone's to-do list, or since you can't hire for it, you have an automated option to not have to stay as lean as possible, because independent operators, those are the two biggest things.
Yeah, honestly, I think Elizabeth really hit it on the head, and it's interesting. Sometimes you say the word automation, and people make this leap to robotics for some reason. But the vast majority of useful automation is software-driven automation, right? How do we automate processes that help us become better operators? And this has happened in pretty much every other industry, right? There's automation processes to help you close your books faster in finance. There's automation processes to help you run just-in-time supply chains, right? And so picking the right types of automation processes that can help us be better operators are the things that are going to allow us to reduce the two major pain points in the restaurant world. That is, improve labor utilization and reduce waste. And I think focusing automation in those areas is really important. Folks have asked in the chat here about our pivot in this particular space. So I figured it's a good opportunity to address that as well. So for some quick background, when I met Steve Ells a little over a year ago, and he was working on Kernel, the first version of that Kernel restaurant that they were building when I met them was, interestingly, a vegan sandwich shop. And the interpretation of automation was, in one part, putting an actual multi-axis robot in the restaurant itself, and that multi-axis robot was moving food into the oven and out of the oven. And I thought this was a unique approach. It looks a lot like what happens in manufacturing. You look at your manufacturing line, you look where there are consistent processes where maybe you can reduce your reliance on human labor, and you can put in a machine to improve. There ended up being a lot of problems with that particular implementation. And as I joined and spent a lot of time with Steve, and we reimagined this problem, and we were thinking about the core of what we were trying to do. And one is, build a wonderful hospitality environment for people, because it's a restaurant and you have to do that, and build remarkable food with chefs and fresh food at the center, right? And those were two of the things that were near and dear to Steve's heart when he was creating Kernel, just as they were near and dear to Steve's heart when he was creating Chipotle. So we just got to look at the problem when we got together a little bit differently. And as we looked at the problem a little bit differently, we actually closed the Kernel restaurants. We removed those robots. We reopened counter service. And at counter service, we've actually put software-based automation at the core of what we do, and our wonderful culinary team at the heart of how we make the choices around what we need to automate. What are the problems you guys are facing today where we can help make your job a little bit easier, where we can reduce your daily cognitive load so that your job at the end of the day feels like a job you want to come back to tomorrow, where we can give you information before it happens, so that you're not scrambling and the customers standing in front of you are happier, where we can help you move food through your line in a way that ensures quality and consistency in the way that we know your customers are going to want. And all of those things were important to Kernel 1.0, just as they are important to Kernel today as we roll out counter service, but with software automation as the main focus versus robotics.
I think that's really interesting to distinguish between the hardware and the software piece. And obviously, you guys are a more advanced and technically savvy operator, and you're already saying we should just focus on software. Hardware is maybe not there. So for the independent operator, it's definitely a reason to double down on thinking about how software can help your business. And obviously, there's a lot of opportunity. There may be a lot of players, but part of this piece too with restaurants and the idea that the bar is lower is how do you stand out in a crowded world, right? Is it through storytelling? Is it through other pieces? Like, what does it mean for a restaurant to get through to that customer? And obviously the core is food. So how can they best tell that story when they're, focused on actual operations and all the things you've said. So how do you balance that out, being, the modern storyteller, to be a brand, but also be an operator?
I think number one, you have to have a point of view. Like if you're an independent operator and just knowing identity, really understanding who you are and running at that. And I think it comes down to making sure that every touch point of your business is saying that message. And I think at the end of the day, it's when they walk in the door and speak, it's aligned to what you've been telling them about. The food's aligned, the hospitality's aligned. That's what's going to keep people coming back and back. And I think, but again, the touch points, or someone could be coming in as your Google, Google Business up to date. Do you have communications that people, even like a good AI option here too, is that chatbots, and people could be calling you. We have one operator who does not put a phone number out. And this would be a great solution now, is that you can have someone call a number and it has all the information you need that's interactive with you. How long are you open? But it feels like a human, right? And I think that that should be aligned as much as if it were a real person talking. But I think that as it comes to independent operators, you just have to, you have to have a good story, a point of view, and it has to line up with what the customer experiences at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I'll grab something from my former partner Gary Vaynerchuk's playbook or script and just say, like, restaurants are not food businesses. Restaurants are content businesses. And if you think what you're selling is food, you're totally misunderstanding the exercise. And that's just the most important thing to understand. Like you have to tell a story. You have to sell something that is connecting with customers. Product market fit is the name of the game in restaurants too. And that's about when you discover the brand online, what does that feel like? And do you connect with it? And when you walk through the door, what does that feel like? And do you connect with it? And in some ways, the food is kind of the last point of contact, right? Like you're kind of connecting with the food after you've already made all the decisions about whether or not you're going to spend money at that restaurant. So I would say the key is to understand the game you're playing.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I need to default to the two experts in the room on this one, but there are things that are certainly resonating. I mean, one of the things that I think is for sure true is that a remarkable product with no remarkable marketing behind it, no great storytelling, no brand, goes nowhere. And just as if you are marketing empty promises or a product that isn't great, you also will go nowhere. And I mean, so here I am stating the obvious. You need a remarkable product, and that is the food, but you need to have, as Elizabeth put it, a clear point of view and perspective around it, and as Ben put it, the right content and storytelling around it, so that you're distinct. And I think those things come down to, or at least from my perspective, they come down to authenticity. If it is true, it is always easier to tell. Whatever it is, by the way, whatever thing we're talking about in life, that is, I think, just a universal truth. If you have a truth and you are speaking that truth, it will come across as such, and it will be a clear perspective. And so for us at Counter Service, when we took our two chefs and we said, listen, guys, I want you to cook the food that you love. I don't want you to think about what you think other people love. I don't want you to think about the market. I just want you to cook stuff that you love. And the more time they spent doing that, the more clear it was, this perspective that they were, putting forward in the food. And then as storytellers, we looked at the food that they were creating, and in using the Socratic method, pulled from them an understanding of what it was that, like, why are you doing this? Why did you just put that sandwich and that sandwich next to each other? They don't make sense. And now, but once you start to understand it and you grab those pieces and then you tell that story back to people, authentic stories are things that resonate with consumers. And I think they resonate even more with today's generations than they have in the past.
I think one tangible thing to take away is when you're creating an opening budget for marketing and PR. I think to Ben's point, and branding, I agree with you completely that it's such a, communicating your story is unbelievably important. The other option is there's a company here in New Orleans that has been purchasing old historic operations. So like old oyster bars, and they already had the SEO and the reviews, and their acquisition strategy and growth strategy was acquiring companies with this unbelievable heritage. There's that side too. But I would say budget for it. Number one is like for marketing and PR. You just have to, if you don't do it, you need to go out the gate, particularly in this day and age, strong and a very tight storyline.
I think you should budget for marketing. I don't think you should budget for PR for what it's worth. Yeah. I think PR is a dated game and ought to be free or just not exist. No offense to the PR people in the room. The good ones are good storytellers and are shifting their businesses, but I would certainly budget for marketing and content creation. But the idea of paying somebody $5,000 a month for press releases is insane. I think you should just light the cash on fire instead.
I think when you're doing it should be for opening, if at all. But yes, I think marketing is, and I think it's also for independent operators to educate yourself on what the difference is. I think that's one thing a lot of operators could default to PR because they know that's where press is, but it has to be complemented and or prioritized as marketing. Totally hear you on that, Ben. Yeah. And we know great PR firms that we love. Caveats. Love them. We don't do it in-house by choice. But I think that, I think if you're to prioritize a budget, we would encourage you to do branding and marketing before you would allocate for PR.
And for the PR, you got to have your own story. Don't count on them to help tell your story. They can amplify it maybe, but you got to know what you're doing and not count on other people to define your brand for you. And I think with that, Ben said something too, obviously, about the top apps for all these direct apps, whether it's Chipotle or McDonald's or whoever. So they're owning the customer directly, and then they're also competing with all these marketplaces. So you have all of this attention-grabbing piece that we discussed. How does an independent or even a larger restaurant, like what you're doing with counter service in terms of where you're growing, how do you maintain that direct relationship if you don't have the ability to launch an app like McDonald's, right, to own the customer? And you don't want to compete against the DoorDash, so you're not having to fight for someone coming in. And at the end of the day, most people are discovering these places online before they ever think about leaving their office or their house. So how does the small guy or small person, how do they connect and maintain that relationship? And maybe it's part of personalization. I don't know, but love to get your thoughts on how they can actually connect with that customer.
I mean, I think they just should launch an app. I don't think anything is impossible, and everything is easier to do nowadays. There are easy, low-cost tools that can help you make a web-based application that even if it's just their website that you can access conveniently from your mobile phone. It's not that hard. That's my message. It's not that hard. It doesn't have to be that expensive. You can do it.
I mean, I would say, I think it does come down to focus a little bit and sort of picking a lane. I mean, I find a lot of restaurants, I think we can all sort of agree, a lot of restaurants don't even make use of the customers that are in the restaurant already. So like, I think retention plays here big time. Obviously, if you're spending the money to have a storefront in the right neighborhood, you've decided to, like, whatever you're paying for the audience, you're paying for the eyeballs, you're paying for the location. So I think start by just thinking about retention and making sure everyone who comes through the door is somebody who can be turned into a customer one way or another. And then I do think a lot of it does come back to storytelling. I mean, I think the thing that independent restaurants where you have an advantage over larger companies is the authenticity of the story you can tell and the speed with which you can tell it. And that always is going to resonate. And I do think when you look at how those things work on the large content platforms like Instagram and TikTok, the algorithms are trying to surface the most authentic stuff, the most interesting stuff. And so you see a lot of examples like restaurants that have broken out because they've gotten that piece right. So, the independent restaurant has, in theory, a storefront, its agility and its authenticity. And those are things that larger companies don't have. So you kind of have to play to your strengths.
Yeah. And I mean, we don't build a lot of apps for our operators. I think that it's a good play when it's multi-unit, national scale. I would kind of push against that, Tom, on your end. But I think if you did do it, you would do vibe coding. You could do something really quick and get it up, which kind of comes our conversation back to AI. But I think the most important part is there's so many points of contact with your consumer base that you own which is every social media platform, every loyalty program, every reservation system. I think the most important part is the customer knows where to go to you. And I would say, I don't think you should own all of them, but you should not necessarily interact with all of them. If Instagram and TikTok are your main, streams, you keep those both up to date. You tell them to come find you there. Because I think the one thing that's happening is we're getting so disparate of where to communicate, where we're losing sight of like how often we're doing it. It becomes an unbelievable burden. And so only really, in my opinion, only really using the ones that you actually enjoy using and you feel comfortable navigating within that. I would say one thing I've been interested in watching is there are companies like the Hoxton Hotel Group that are aggregating along with other hospitality businesses to create loyalty around them. They have a thing called this disloyalty program that I've been kind of tracking that's really fascinating because they aren't necessarily they're not going to compete with the Hyatts and the Hiltons of the world. But what they're doing is saying as a collective of small businesses can we come together and actually aggregate something that's bigger. And so because our customer bases are the same, there's a company called Sonato that's doing it for membership clubs. But I think that that's something that as independent businesses, independent operators, I'm most curious about. I think that OS Benefits is doing that on the health insurance side. We're saying we can gain buying power and go purchase ACA compliant health insurance if we do this together. And I think that there's going to be more of that pops up. I think Blackbird's a great example of getting to market with that now. But I'm curious to see as that continues. But I think my biggest takeaway is only activate the channels that you care about and the ones that you want to communicate on, but own all of them. Any new social platform, get your handle and control that.
And that's great. We're running up towards the end of the panel, and I want to make sure that we kind of get potentially a couple of questions. But one last big thought that I'd love to get everyone's perspective on is we've moved mostly to 75% off premise, it seems like, from the most recent data in terms of where the restaurant industry is going. And with that, how do you see that affecting the actual underlying concepts? I know Tom's had a pivot in here, and you guys are both dealing with a lot of different players, whether it's from more white tablecloth or less white tablecloths and less Michelin style. Is it more ghost kitchens and multi-concepts in small spaces? Is it a QSR that does try to leverage technology so they can focus on, much higher quality ingredients? But where do you see the industry going in terms of concepts, specifically based on how technology is going to affect them going forward? And just love to get each of your thoughts on that as we're starting to wrap up.
It feels like the biggest unlock with 75% being off-prem, at least for the quick service space. I think I can't speak anything to the fine dining space. I just don't know it. But it's ultimately a good thing. It means you have access to more real estate. You can take smaller spaces, right? If hospitality is now creating a couple standing counters and a nice space for people to for a smaller group to come in and out of, that's ultimately a really good thing, I think, for these restaurants. You walk past so many restaurants here in New York City, these quick service in particular, and they all occupy at least 2,500 square feet, and they all have just these horrible empty dining rooms, which is no good for them as operators, and then it's no good for the customers because nobody wants to walk into it in an empty dining room. So it creates a weird downward spiral. So it's on the one hand, it opens up this good opportunity. On the other hand, I think it does suggest that as an operator, even small, it behooves you to be on the digital platforms, to be on the marketplaces, to be on TikTok, to be on Instagram, to have a even very, very simple little site that can tell your story and make people know that in the same way that you invested in the physical space, you also invested in that digital space, and that's a digital landing pad for them to come and understand you and interact with you and get some of those emotional components from you that they're not going to get otherwise.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll say I see concepts getting much more ephemeral. There's awesome stuff that's happening that's basically just a person or a group with a social media account, and every once in a while they turn it into something physical, and it's either a pop-up concept as a collaboration, or they show up at festivals or stuff like that. I'm not sure that that's a humongous business in the end, but I think in terms of marking trends and noting interesting things, I think that's something that's happening that's awesome. as a consumer of those things, it's so fun when they pop up, and you get to kind of feel the looseness of it, and it feels like those kinds of things are playing with many fewer rules than a traditional restaurant. And so, to the extent that there's real creativity there, that's going to be inspiration broadly for the industry. I think that's incredible. I do think, in terms of the larger scale stuff, in terms of the higher stakes restaurants, certainly it's interesting to note that whereas those concepts used to be, the genesis used to be a chef that got famous somewhere, whether that's on TV or elsewhere. Now those are all social media people that are getting famous and turning that into physical locations. So, and in many ways that comes back to where the audience is, right? So different audience tactics for sure. There's definitely this opportunity to be smaller and more agile, and to essentially be empowered that way, because smaller, more agile, less overhead, you kind of get to do different things. In the end, scale is going to still be scale, where you need to find ways to make more money and have more people and be more efficient, and that's where things like counter service come in. But in terms of where that like core baseline creativity is happening, I definitely think it's awesome that it feels even looser and kind of more one-off than it's ever been.
Yeah, and I would just bring up, in terms of off-prem, like things that come to my mind immediately are event activation, CPG products, alternative revenue streams, and consumer packaged goods is what that means. And I want to touch on two things. I think Cocodoc's pop-up at US Open deserved a slow clap. I thought that was an unbelievable activation. It took this well-marketed box that you saw from every stand, bright orange, and made this experience that was a brick and mortar into something that was within sporting. And then fashion does it all the time. They have Burberry did like a pop-up martini bar. They're following these other industries are looking to us as getting more brand capital and to increase their viewership and their real stake in the game. And so I think that we actually are at a point right now as an industry that when those things hit your table, which is very rare, those can be so powerful. But I do want to bring up consumer packaged goods and hard goods. I think in the last 10 years, being able to make your own food consumable product and being able to make your own hard goods when these MOQs or minimum order quantities are decreasing, and you can get on the line and actually produce stuff, it actually allows your brand to be in someone else's kitchen or in someone else's home. And then that's a constant reminder of your value prop to them. And I think that can be very powerful. And we've been able to bring that to life for several of our operators, and it proves to be very powerful. A lot, very hard to get to direct to consumer. So, don't go into that blindly. Do a lot of research. It's very time and financial. You have to really kind of allocate a huge budget for it. So anyway, I think
you guys hit it on the head. It's having the audience directly and then figuring out, efficient and smart ways to monetize, whether it's a pop-up or taking your restaurant and launching a CPG product because you already have an audience, you're not trying to be on shelf. So just trying to think creatively with the community you have, it sounds like is a very important part no matter what you're doing. And I think we've run out of time here on the panel. So I want to thank everybody. This was amazing. And hopefully we'll get a few of these questions going forward and we'll see how they'll affect us for our next panel. But I want to thank everyone today. Thanks for joining us. And this was a wonderful discussion. Yeah. And Perrin, great job moderating. It was a great conversation. And I want to thank everyone for joining. Great conversations in the side chat. We will drop the LinkedIn's for everyone in the side chat so people can connect with them directly. Everyone stay tuned. We'll be talking with Mark Cuban in just about half an hour. And yeah, thank you, everyone. We'll talk to you all soon. All right.